Good evening, blog viewers. We're going to continue with the video format today, because I think the format was actually conducive last time to different things. I am also going to try to use today some video clips as well from my computer, so that's another reason we'll be using video today. If people comment and wish that there be more video, I will continue with that. But I think for today, and maybe for a few more of our posts, we will stick with video because it allows us to do some other things. And as always, as we expressed last time, your comments and questions are very much welcome. This is a blog that is for everybody. These are issues that touch almost everyone's life. These are issues that people have to wrestle with in one form or another during the course of their lives, and we can all benefit from the different perspectives that people bring to these issues. And that is an issue that, in terms of perspectives, I think anyone can sort of appreciate. If you've ever been anywhere and the Grand Canyon or another beautiful place, and you're taking pictures, and you get home later and you look at the pictures and you think, oh, these pictures didn't quite, express the fullness of the scene. And but yet each one of them is true. Each one of those pictures is accurate. It was an accurate reflection of what was being shown to the camera. But in fact, it wasn't a complete picture. And obviously, that's the same way with philosophy or the things we're talking about. Each of these viewpoints is part of the picture, but nothing is a complete picture. And the more people participate and contribute and add their viewpoints, the better we will be. So today we will talk about a doctrine that I think has been touched on in a lot of the other posts, but we will discuss it in more detail. And I think it sort of ties together a lot of different ideas that have been explored in the blog so far. And that is a doctrine known as ethical perfectionism. And we'll get into the definition of it for a second. But as soon as one says perfectionism, I want to stress that it is not what people normally think of. Perfectionism, in sort of the common parlance, has been viewed as a negative trait, someone that focuses on a task excessively and has to be perfect in that thing, or else has a huge disappointment and anxiety from not being perfect at a certain thing, getting straight A's, or writing the best brief in the world, or coming up with the best idea ever and executing it. That's not what we mean. That's not what is meant by the term ethical perfectionism. And I want to define that in the context of two definitions of the term. The first one is the first definition of ethical perfectionism. It was in the context of a lecture I was listening to on John Stuart Mill, the philosopher who's most well known for his essay on liberty, where he defends liberty and the need for it in a democratic or liberal society for various reasons. It's not a very long work. I would encourage everyone to read it. And again, that is on liberty. The lecture I was listening to was by a professor in England by the name of Samuel Clarke, and his lectures are actually quite good on different philosophers. And in the context of a lecture on John Stuart Mill, he gave a definition of perfectionism, or ethical perfectionism, which I thought was very striking, and I'll read it for you here. I'm reading from my computer right now. Clarke says, Mill is a perfectionist. He thinks that the goal of life is the development of human and individual potential. He thinks that the moral and general ideal is to flower, to become a fully flourishing human being. The good life for a human is to develop from child to adult with all one's human and individual capacities, the intellectual, the emotional, the aesthetic, the moral, fully flowered, fully active. Failure would be to remain foolish, cold, uncultured, and selfish. These are all ways of failing to flourish as a human being. And that is Samuel Clarke again. So the definition that Clark gives us here of perfectionism is of a person, again using the flower analogy, of a person who is flourishing in many different areas, not just in one area. I think that's a concept that we see and people struggle with a lot is our definitions of success today have become very narrowly tailored to success in a business or career or something of the sort. But I think here Mill and the doctrine of perfectionism is talking about development in a whole series of areas, as sort of being a well-rounded person. We've heard that terminology in common day-to-day life, but I think he gives it much more definition than sort of the phrase well-rounded offers one. And again, it is the development of all of our human and individual capacities, intellectual, emotional, aesthetic, our appreciation for beauty in the world, art, the moral, and so on. So that is one definition we have of perfectionism. Another we have is by, let me get the reference here of this author, John Gray, in his essay, Mill's Liberalism and Liberalism's Posterity. And similarly to Professor Clark, Gray defines perfectionism as follows. Like Aristotle's, with which it has much in common, Mill's conception of human happiness is one of active self-development, not passive enjoyment or contentment. Further, Mill's account of happiness requires that the activities and projects pursued must be one in which generically human powers and abilities are developed and exercised, and at the same time that these pursuits express the abilities and needs that are distinctive of and peculiar to each individual. So again, the focus on the development and exercise of various human powers and capabilities and capacities, not limited to one or two areas, but the whole range of human powers and abilities. So I think the definitions we get from both Gray and Clark are very similar of Mill's conception of perfectionism. I went back, and obviously one thing we should always do when we see definitions like this in sort of the secondary literature is see, if there is support for it in the actual author's text. And I went back to Mill's On Liberty to see to what extent we can find perfectionism sort of described in that text and how Mill thinks about it. And I did find there were several references to it in On Liberty. On Liberty is a text, just to give you a generic description of it. Mill is defending a liberal conception of liberty, basically, and saying that what are the areas. The text is really focused on when does a liberal society have any right to infringe upon the freedom of an individual for any purpose, and Mill's answer to that is when the individual is harming someone else, not when he's harming himself or when he's doing something that we believe is stupid or foolish or harmful to himself. Those are not areas where we can interfere. So that's sort of the generic outline of On Liberty. In the context of that discussion, Mill does give definitely some explanation of the concept of perfectionism. Let me point you to some passages here. He says, the end of man, or that which is prescribed by the eternal or immutable dictates of reason, and not suggested by vague and transient desires, is the highest and most harmonious development of his powers to a complete and consistent whole. That, therefore, the object toward which every human being must ceaselessly direct his efforts, and on which especially those who design to influence their fellow men must ever keep their eyes, is the individuality of power and development. That for this there are two requisites, freedom and a variety of situations. So we have one account there again, so that he says the end of man is the highest and most harmonious development of his powers to a complete and consistent whole. We certainly see there some of the concept that Clark and Gray brought up in the definition of perfectionism. A human is the end of a human being is to develop all of his faculties. And interestingly here, and this is a point we'll touch on more, certainly as the lecture goes on, Mill says here that for that kind of development to occur, there are two requirements. First, freedom, and of course the essay is on liberty, so it wouldn't be surprising to find that expressed. And the second would be a variety of situations. And by that, I think he means a variety of different life experiences, a variety of different challenges, pushing yourself in a lot of different dimensions, getting out of the routine of day-to-day life to some extent. I think that has to be his point there. And again, we find more of that in the text, more of this on liberty, more of this exact idea of perfectionism expressed. He says, here in an important passage, the human faculties of perception, judgment, discriminative feeling, mental activity, and even moral preferences are exercised only in making a choice. He who does nothing because it is the custom makes no choice. He gains no practice either in discerning or in desiring what is best. The mental and moral, like the muscular powers, are improved only by being used. The faculties are called into no exercise by doing a thing merely because others do it. Again, the focus on freedom, the focus on developing and making choices, and developing a lot of many different human faculties. We see that again there. Several other passages I want to focus on that again give this definition of perfectionism and sort of describe it in the text. In this passage, you sort of see it negatively. Sometimes thinkers sort of sarcastically describe an opposing viewpoint, and you can tell by just the mere sarcasm in the statement how much they disagree with it. And here he's talking about people that don't develop their faculties individually. And he says, thus the mind itself is bowed to the yoke. Even in what people do for pleasure, conformity is the first thing thought of. They live like in crowds. They exercise choice only among things commonly done. Peculiarity of taste, eccentricity of conduct are shunned equally with crimes, until by dint of not following their own nature, they have no nature to follow. Their human capacities are withered and starved. They become incapable of any strong wishes or native pleasures, and are generally without either opinions or feelings of home growth or properly their own. Now is this, or is this not, the desirable condition of human nature? Now, obviously, we've seen the sarcasm. He clearly seems to imply, no, this is not the desirable condition of human nature. This is, humans were not meant to not have any of their own ideas or feelings, to have no nature, to have their human capacities withered and starved. Again, the description of the flowering in the garden that we saw in Professor Clark's account. To not exercise these various faculties is to let them wither and starve. So we see that again here. And I think we see it one more time. I'm stressing these things just to show you how pervasive this thought is in Mill's thought. Again, a rich, diverse life created by developing various faculties. And Mill writes, it is not by wearing down into uniformity all that is individual in themselves, but by cultivating it and calling it forth within the limits imposed by the rights and interests of others, that human beings become a noble and beautiful object of contemplation. And as the works partake the character of those who do them, by the same process human life also becomes rich, diversified, and animating, furnishing more abundant aliment to high thoughts and elevating feelings, and strengthening the tie which binds every individual to the race, by making the race infinitely better, worth belonging to. In proportion to the development of his individuality, each person becomes more valuable to himself, and is therefore capable of being more valuable to others. A beautiful passage here by Mill. Again, repeating the thoughts and the benefits of becoming sort of developing capacities across a wide range of areas. He says here that, someone that engages in this activity has higher thoughts, elevated feelings. He becomes more valuable to himself, a very interesting thought, and is therefore capable of being more valuable to others. And that is a very important point here, that Mill seems to suggest that by perfecting our faculties, not only are we perfecting ourselves, but we become more interesting to other people, we become more valuable to them, we become more capable of helping them in different ways. So I think it's pretty clear that the Mill's On Liberty can be read, as Clark and Gray do, as clearly implying that he favors an account of human ends, or a purpose of human life, that is development of all human faculties, not just one or two. And I think he clearly, in some of the passages we read, also takes the view that failing to perfect these different faculties is a failure in some way of becoming a full human being. That is clear in some of the passages we read as well. And I guess one thing I want to do is sort of question that and see whether that makes sense. Is it true that failure to perfect all the human faculties results in the failure of a life? One could think of certain people like Mozart or Mark Twain or anyone that was really great at something, and think, well, that was actually a pretty good life. That person left a legacy, is still spoken about. But I want to look at that more now in the context of some multimedia clips. I want to focus on two people. First, Mark Twain and Citizen Kane, the movie Citizen Kane, which describes the life of. Well, we'll get to Citizen Kane in a second, but let's start with Mark Twain. I'm going to show a clip from the Ken Burns documentary on Mark Twain. Obviously, Samuel Clemens was his real name. And this clip is focusing on, it's a biography of Twain, and it's toward the end of his life now, the documentary is focusing on. And you clearly see that while Twain was very successful in many different ways, in writing Adventures of Huckleberry Finn and Tom Sawyer, and being probably the most successful American novelist ever, that there was issues in his life that he never resolved. He had a very difficult relationship with his family. He had a difficult relationship with money. He was sort of very wasteful with it, and then he took a lot of risks to get more money. He was really driven by money. He seemed to have problems really relating to people, and all of those things were sort of things he struggled with. So let me play this clip from again, this is Ken Burns' Mark Twain documentary.
I believe he didn't want to write as he used to closet himself away and write alone, and then come back and read his work, because he felt so much alone anyway. He didn't want to be even more alone.
There is nothing. There is no God and no universe. There is only empty space. not be published until well after his own death. The last chapter of The Mysterious Stranger, where the God that human beings have invented is insane. It has to be a nightmare. Why would we invent a God who could make everybody happy and didn't make a single human being ever happy?
Our Bible reveals to us the character of our God with minute and remorseless exactness. The portrait is substantially that of a man, if one can imagine a man charged and overcharged with evil impulses far beyond the human limit. His acts expose his vindictive, unjust, ungenerous, pitiless, and vengeful nature constantly. He is always punishing innocent children for the misdeeds of their parents, punishing unoffending populations for the misdeeds of their rulers. It is perhaps the most damnatory biography that exists in print anywhere. It makes Nero an angel of light by contrast.
It's the dark truth, the bottom from which I think he was struggling with all his life. A despair, which was profound. I think he was a depressed person. I think he wrote like a depressive, who was struggling terribly with that sense that it's all futile, that we cannot know why we're here, and that it all makes very little sense in the long run. Twain spent most of his time now working on his autobiography.
Okay, that is the clip from, again, Ken Burns' Mark Twain. The second clip I'm going to show is a clip from the movie Citizen Kane, which is a movie about the life of William Garrison Hearst, the famous newspaper publisher whose newspapers at some point had about 45 million in circulation, and he also ran for president. He made millions of dollars and lived in a huge mansion in Florida, which is depicted in the film. So again, successful in many different ways on some objective career and professional levels. But still, as we see here in this clip, in other ways, it was not able to flourish or develop some of his other faculties. This is a clip near the end of the movie in which his wife, after his wife leaves him, he proceeds to act as follows. This is a shorter clip.
to all mankind. Freedom is indivisible.
Okay. So I think we see in. Sorry, I'm just putting the video back here. I think we see in both of these videos an explanation or an illustration of the power of the doctrine of perfectionism and what happens in human life when there are certainly perfection of one or two qualities, but a complete failure to pursue other qualities and develop them, not even perfect them, but develop them in some way, shape, or form. We saw in Twain, toward the end of his life, he became an incredibly depressed person. His writings were incredibly dark and depressing. He struggled with depression, as I think one of the speakers was commenting on, and for lack of a better word, just lost it. And I think we see the same thing in the Citizen Kane clip. Again, someone that loses it is not able to deal with events as they're happening, and certainly not models for us as we live our lives in many ways. So I hope those clips were helpful. I think sometimes they can speak very powerfully of what we're talking about here. I guess I want to end this lecture with the description again of what it is that we see in Mill's account. How do we become a perfectionist, an ethical perfectionist? Is this something we want to do? Now, of course, my impression of some of this stuff when I was reading it was, boy, this sounds very idealistic. Perfecting all these different qualities, and how realistic is it? I had some feedback from a blog reader that told. I'll read his quote. He wrote, "The greatest good for man is inevitably, inexorably intertwined with the nature of man. But alas, there is a possibility that there are at least two natures of man. So what is the greatest good for one may be the greatest harm to the other, and vice versa." And I think that is, if you just substitute in that thought the notion that there are capacities of man, as we've been discussing throughout this whole discussion, we'll see maybe that perfection in one area causes problems for the other, can impede the other, and that is definitely a struggle. So, for example, perfecting your intellectual qualities may cause you to lack in some social qualities in some sense, or aesthetic qualities. If perfecting your aesthetic qualities, painting and such, may prevent you from developing your intellectual qualities. So all of it is somewhat idealistic. But I think that's not enough to just say, oh, this is idealistic and we can't attain it, so forget about it. Again, that's something that we've talked about in various posts. Just because something might be an ideal for our action and it may be ultimately very difficult to achieve does not mean that we should not pursue that. We should make it a goal and, of course, be okay with the fact if we don't completely reach it. I guess the question would be, what's the alternative? What is the alternative view? We see in these clips that we saw from both Twain and Citizen Kane that not pursuing perfectionism is not a great quality either, not a great choice either. So I guess it's what I'm trying to say is to say a philosophy or an ideal is idealistic is not enough. You have to sort of show that some alternative is better, and even if it's idealistic, you'd have to show that pursuing the ideal, even if you somehow fall short, is still not desirable. And I don't think that you can claim that in terms of perfectionism, because it does seem to me that it's very important to a good life, developing in many different ways. And again, I want to end the post by focusing on a thought that Mill had, and when he said that, how is it now, getting away from the actual definition of perfectionism to its practice, how is it that we can become perfectionists? How can we pursue this desirable state in which all our faculties are being developed and perfected? And he says one is freedom, and the other is sort of varieties varieties of experiences. He made that point several times. And I think that's again, to go back to, I want to pull up a quote here from actually the director and the actor of the Citizen Kane clip, Orson Welles, on the importance of experiences and experimentation and different types of activities in your life. Wells has a beautiful quote on that, and I want to read that for everyone. He says, and this was in 1960 when he was interviewed after Citizen Kane, where he had done several different things with his life. He wrote, I suppose you could say that if someone doesn't spread themselves too much, they can have a more solid and enduring and established success. And if that had been what I'd wanted, which it never has been, then I shouldn't have tried so many different things. But I've always been more interested in experiment than accomplishment. I'll read that quote again, because it really hits at the point that Mill was making in his emphasis on varieties of experiences. Wells writes, actually this was in an interview, he said, I suppose you could say that if someone doesn't spread themselves too much, they can have a more solid and enduring and established success. And if that had been what I wanted, which it never had been, then I shouldn't have tried so many different things. But I've always been more interested in experiment than accomplishment. And that notion, again, that we've talked about in other posts of seeking various types of adventures and challenging yourself in different areas is something that we'll come back to in later posts. But I want to end the post today with another clip, actually, where I thought this was a very well done clip showing a life that does not engage in experimentation, a life that is very routine and repetitive, and sort of ties in nicely with the concepts we've been talking about today. So again, I'll play this clip and then I'll say goodbye to everybody. Thank you.
Rising, streetcar, 4 hours in the office of the factory, meal, streetcar, 4 hours of work, meal, sleep, and Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, and Saturday, according to the same rhythm. This path is easily followed, most of the time. Albert Camus, The Myth of Sisyphus. Albert Camus was an Algerian-French author and philosopher, and born in the year 1913. He is often placed in association with existentialism, regardless of his rejection of the categorization. Perhaps Albert's most controversial and popular idea was the idea of discovering the absurd. Camus challenges society and questions the existence and importance of the meaning of life. He forces people to rethink about their daily routines and the reason for their everyday actions. He forces people to discover the absurd. We live in a society that is built up of routine. Billions of people will continue to strive for excellence or the American dream as they unknowingly walk through specific robot-like tasks each and every day. But one day, the why arises, and everything begins in that weariness tinged with amazement. acts of a mechanical life, but at the same time, it inaugurates the impulse of consciousness. Albert Camus, The Myth of Sisyphus. Until we ask why, we cannot be freed from this continuous cycle of meaningless action. Rising, streetcar, 4 hours in the office of the factory, meal, streetcar, 4 hours of work. Until we ask why, we cannot be freed from this continuous cycle of streetcar, 4 hours in the factory. This society is Friday, streetcar, 4 hours of work. People will be on the stressful, excellent, nightmare, streetcar, 4 hours of walking the fastest about like Friday, such everything, 4 hours of work. Until we ask why, we cannot be freed from this continuous cycle of meaningless actions. Friday, Saturday, according to the same rhythm. Its path is easily followed most of the time.
Okay, and that is a YouTube clip, which we will end today's post. I hope everyone has a good week, and I will see you soon. Bye-bye.